Lila would always remember that night, the night the sky burned the color of sorrow. The fire roared like a living thing, swallowing everything her father had ever built. Inside the collapsing workshop, Jack Carver stumbled through the choking smoke, calling his daughter's name with a voice that scraped his lungs raw. "Lila, where are you?" The heat was unbearable. Sparks danced around him like furious stars. Metal groaned overhead, threatening to fall. Then through the noise he heard the faintest sound, a small cough, a frightened whimper. He followed it, heart-pounding. His boots stuck to the blistered floor, the air so thick with smoke he could barely breathe. When he reached the melted office door, he tore it open with his shoulder and found her curled in the corner, trembling, her tiny hands covering her face. He rushed forward, scooped her up. She clung to him with desperate strength. The faint scent of lavender in her hair cut through the smoke. It was her mother's shampoo, the only clean thing left in the fire's filthy breath. "Close your eyes, sweetheart," he whispered. "Hold on to me." He ran. Each step was agony. Every breath tore at his chest. The world screamed and cracked around them. When they burst out into the cold night, Jack fell to his knees, gasping. Lila's arms were tight around his neck. Behind them, his life burned. Sirens wailed in the distance. The fire's light flickered against the clouds. Ash rained down like snow. "Is it gone, Daddy?" Lila's voice was tiny, shaking. He looked at what was left of his workshop, the heart of his dreams, and for a long moment he couldn't speak. Then he whispered, "Yeah, baby. It's gone." He pulled her closer, feeling her heartbeat against his chest. It was the only rhythm left that made sense. Weeks later, the fire was out, but its shadow lingered. The smell clung to everything, the walls, the furniture, even his skin. Jack sat at the kitchen table, hands rough and stained, staring at the bills stacked in front of him. The world outside had gone quiet. The neighbors had stopped coming by. Everyone had already moved on. He couldn't. The silence pressed against his chest until he could barely breathe. He rubbed his face, felt the stubble and exhaustion. His hands, once steady and skilled, now trembled slightly. From the next room came the faint sound of Lila humming. It was a song her mother used to sing, a tune that hung like a ghost in the air. He closed his eyes. The melody held him together better than any drink or prayer could. "You can fix steel," he murmured to himself. "You can rebuild walls. But how do you fix a heart?" No answer came. Just the soft hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the wall clock, and Lila's voice trying to fill the space between them. He needed work. Anything. He opened his laptop, its old fan wheezing like an asthmatic sigh. His inbox blinked with a single new message. From Victoria Hale. Subject: proposal for restoration project. Hale Estate. The name froze him in place. Hale Industries, the corporation that had swallowed his first company whole, the same that had pushed him into bankruptcy. The same name connected to the accident that took Claire, his wife. His stomach tightened. He shut the laptop. But curiosity was a stubborn thing. He reopened it. The message was brief, polite, and strangely personal. Victoria Hale wanted him to oversee the restoration of an old property. She offered a salary that didn't make sense, too high, too generous. Jack read it twice, 3 times. The glow of the screen reflected in his tired eyes. "No," he whispered. "Not her. Not again." But his mind wouldn't let it go. The numbers. The chance to start over. The possibility of giving Lila something better than this quiet ruin. He pushed away from the table and walked into her room. She was asleep, curled under a thin blanket, her little bear tucked beneath her chin. Her hair was messy, her breathing soft. He sat beside her, brushed a smudge of soot from her cheek that hadn't washed off completely. "If I could trade all the money in the world for your mother back, I would," he whispered. "But all I've got now is you." Her eyes fluttered open. "Don't be sad, Daddy. You still fix things. You always do." He smiled faintly. "I try, baby. I really try." She drifted back to sleep, her tiny hand still holding his finger. Back in the kitchen, Jack stared at the laptop again. His pulse matched the ticking of the clock. For a long while, he said nothing. Then he opened a blank reply. "Miss Hale," he typed, "I accept your proposal." He hesitated, then added, "For the sake of the work, and for what needs to be rebuilt." He hit send. The soft click sounded louder than it should have, final and irreversible. He leaned back, staring into the darkened room. Through the window, the night wind moved through the trees, whispering against the glass. The fire had taken everything he had built. But maybe this was a way to build something else. He exhaled, long and slow. The smell of smoke was still there, but beneath it something faint stirred in his chest. It wasn't hope exactly, more like the ghost of it. Years later, when Lila would tell this story, she would say, "That night my father didn't just lose everything he had. He answered a message from the past, one that would change both our lives forever." Jack woke before dawn. The light hadn't yet touched the horizon, but his mind was already awake, sharp, restless, and heavy with regret. He sat at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee, staring at the laptop that still glowed faintly in the dark. The words he'd written the night before were burned into his thoughts. "I accept your proposal." He had sent it. There was no taking it back. Lila padded in quietly, dragging her blanket behind her like a cloud. Her hair was wild from sleep. She rubbed her eyes, climbed into his lap, and rested her head against his chest. "You didn't sleep," she murmured. Jack brushed a hand through her hair. "No, not much." "Are we going somewhere?" He hesitated. He hadn't told her yet. The truth still tasted uncertain on his tongue. Maybe he said softly, "Someplace new. Somewhere we can start again." She tilted her head up to look at him, her eyes sleepy but curious. "Does it have trees?" Jack smiled faintly. "I think it does." By afternoon, an answer arrived. "Mr. Carver, we're pleased you accepted. Transportation and lodging will be provided. Please arrive by Friday. The Hale estate is in Somerset County. A car will meet you at the station. V. Hale." Jack read it twice. The formality, the brevity, it sounded like her. He had never met Victoria Hale in person, but her name carried a weight that made people either bow or break. Years ago, her company had destroyed his business deal. The fallout had ruined him, cost him his wife's faith in safety, and in some quiet way taken her life. And yet, here she was offering him work. It felt wrong. But so did staying here surrounded by ashes. The next 2 days passed in quiet motion. Jack packed tools into a dented metal case, wrenches, screwdrivers, a torch he couldn't bear to leave behind. Each sound, the click of the locks, the rustle of old work gloves felt like saying goodbye to a version of himself. Lila filled her own small backpack with drawings, her favorite book, and a photo of her mother. She slipped it inside without a word. On Friday morning, the train station smelled of rain and old wood. The loudspeaker cracked with announcements. Jack and Lila stood side by side, their breath clouding in the cold air. Lila pressed her hand into his. "Are we going to live there?" "For a while," Jack said. "It's a big job. Will the lady be nice?" He thought about the name again. Victoria Hale. The woman who had more power than she knew what to do with. The woman whose decisions had rippled through his life like a storm. "I don't know," he answered quietly. "But we'll find out." The train arrived with a sigh of brakes. They climbed aboard. The seats were cracked but warm. Lila leaned her head against his shoulder, humming softly as the train began to move. Outside, the city disappeared, replaced by long stretches of fields and winding rivers. Jack watched them blur by. With each mile, the weight of the past shifted slightly, not gone, but lighter. Still, somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered, "What are you walking into?" He tried not to listen. Hours later, they reached Somerset County. The platform was nearly empty, the air smelling faintly of pine and distant rain. A man in a black coat stood by a car, sleek, polished, far too expensive for a mechanic like Jack. "Mr. Carver?" the man asked. Jack nodded. "Miss Hale asked me to bring you to the estate." The man opened the door. Lila climbed in first, wide-eyed. The leather seats squeaked under her weight. As the car rolled away from the station, the landscape changed. Townhouses gave way to rolling hills and then to dense forests. The sky grew darker clouds pressing low. Lila pressed her forehead to the window. "It's pretty," she whispered, "like a fairy tale." Jack managed to smile. "Let's hope it has a better ending." The road narrowed until it felt like a path through another world. Finally, they reached it, a pair of iron gates taller than any tree. The metal was aged, its surface engraved with vines and initials that time had nearly erased, H.E. The driver pressed a button, and the gates groaned open. The sound was slow, ancient, almost mournful. Beyond them stretched the Hale estate. Even from the car, Jack could see it, a mansion of stone, and silence, its walls dark with ivy, its windows reflecting nothing. He felt the weight of it settle in his chest. The place was grand, yes, but there was no warmth. It stood like a monument to something lost. As they approached the entrance, Lila whispered, "It's beautiful, but it feels sad." Jack turned toward her, surprised. "You feel that too?" She nodded, like it's waiting for someone to smile again. He didn't know what to say. The car stopped. The driver opened the door. Jack stepped out, first gravel crunching under his boots. The air smelled faintly of rain and stone. He turned toward Lila. "Stay close, okay?" A tall woman stood in the doorway, framed by the shadowed arch. She didn't move at first. Then she stepped forward, poised, calm, her voice level when she spoke. "Mr. Carver, you made good time." Jack's chest tightened. So this was her, Victoria Hale. Her tone carried authority, but something in it trembled so slightly he almost missed it. Her eyes studied him, assessing, unreadable. Then they flicked to Lila, whose gaze was open and fearless. "Is this your daughter?" Jack nodded. "Lila." Lila smiled brightly. "Hi, you have a big house." A pause, just long enough for tension to flicker. Then, unexpectedly, Victoria smiled back, a small, uncertain curve. "Yes," she said, "though it hasn't felt like much of a home lately." Jack felt a strange shiver pass through the moment. Something unspoken lingered there like dust on old air. Victoria turned, gesturing toward the wide doors behind her. "You must be tired. Come in." Jack followed her inside. The echo of their footsteps filled the vast, hollow space. He glanced at the stone walls, the cold chandeliers, the silence that seemed to watch them. He didn't say it aloud, but the thought came clear as breath. You can rebuild a place, but some ruins go deeper than walls. And as the doors closed behind them with a low final thud, Lila's voice drifted up soft, wondering daddy. "Why does it feel like this house is holding its breath?" Jack looked at the woman who had once destroyed his life and now held his future in her hands. He didn't answer, because deep down he felt it too. The first thing Jack noticed about the Hale estate wasn't its size, it was the silence. It wasn't the gentle kind of quiet that came from peace, but the kind that echoed from loneliness. Every sound, the creak of a floorboard, the soft click of Victoria Hale's heels, seemed to linger longer than it should, trapped beneath high ceilings and years of unspoken words. Victoria led them through the long corridor, her posture straight, her voice controlled. "This section of the estate is mostly unused," she said, her tone distant but measured. "You'll have access to the workshop behind the east wing. My assistant will send you the restoration plans by morning." Jack nodded, his eyes scanning the walls. Paintings of stern faces watched them, ancestors perhaps all sharing that same cold pride. Lila's small footsteps echoed between them. She gazed up at the portraits with quiet curiosity. "They all look sad," she said softly. Victoria paused mid-step, her shoulders stiffening. "Do they?" Lila nodded, like they forgot how to smile. Jack expected a sharp retort, but instead Victoria only said, "Perhaps they did." Then she continued walking. They reached 2 adjoining rooms near the back of the corridor. "These will be yours," she said, gesturing. "Meals are at 7. My housekeeper Marjorie can show you around tomorrow." Jack nodded again, polite but guarded. "Thank you." Victoria hesitated as though she wanted to say something more. Then with a brief nod she turned and walked away, her heels fading into the vastness of the house. When the sound finally disappeared, the silence returned thick and watchful. Lila tugged at her father's sleeve. "She looks lonely." Jack looked down at her. "She's rich, Lila. People like that don't get lonely." But even as he said it, the words didn't sit right. That night, after Lila fell asleep, Jack lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The faint scent of old wood and dust filled the air. Somewhere down the hall, a grandfather clock ticked with slow authority. He couldn't stop thinking about Victoria Hale, the precision in her voice, the restraint in her movements, the way she had looked at Lila as if trying to remember what innocence felt like. He wasn't sure what he'd expected when he came here. Anger, maybe. Resentment. But what he saw in her eyes wasn't cruelty. It was distance. The kind that didn't come from power, but from pain. He turned on his side, pulling the blanket over himself. "You're not here to understand her," he muttered. "You're here to work." Still, when he finally drifted into uneasy sleep, he dreamed of walls too high to climb and windows that looked out onto nothing but gray skies. Morning brought a fog that wrapped the estate in pale silence. Jack found the workshop easily. It was large, filled with rusted tools and forgotten machines. It smelled of oil dust and time. He got to work. The steady rhythm of his tools calmed him, the scrape of metal, the hum of his drill, the low whistle he always made when he focused. Around noon, he felt a presence behind him. He turned. Victoria stood there, her arms across her eyes, scanning his workbench. "You start early," she said. "It's what I do," Jack replied, not looking up from the broken hinge he was repairing. She walked closer, stopping just beside him. "You kept the old bolts." "They still work," he said. "Not everything old has to be replaced." There was a pause. Then she said quietly, "That's not a philosophy many people here share." Jack looked at her for the first time, really looked. Her features were sharp but tired, like a sculpture that had withstood too many storms. Her gaze, when it met his, wasn't cold, it was cautious. He gestured toward the walls. "This place, it feels heavy." Victoria exhaled a sound that was almost a sigh. "It should. Every stone here remembers something. Not all of it good." Before Jack could respond, a familiar voice cut through the tension. Daddy, Ms. Hale Lila, came running into the workshop holding something in her hands, a small flower, yellow and imperfect. "Look what I found by the garden wall." Victoria blinked, startled. "That garden's been dead for years." Lila smiled proudly. Then, maybe it didn't know. Jack chuckled, but Victoria didn't. She simply stared at the flower as if it were something foreign. "You may put it in water," she said finally, her voice softer than before. "I will," Lila chirped, running out again. For a moment, silence filled the room again, but it wasn't the same kind. It was lighter somehow, like air after rain. Jack turned back to his tools. She's got a way of finding life in things people give up on. Victoria's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile. Children often do, until they learn not to. Her words hung in the air long after she left. That evening, the estate's dining hall glowed with the faint shimmer of candlelight. Jack and Lila sat across from Victoria at the long table. The sound of cutlery echoed faintly. It was Lila who broke the silence. "Ms. Hale, why do you live in such a big house if you're alone?" Jack froze, about to apologize, but Victoria raised a hand slightly. "I wasn't always alone," she said. Her tone was calm, but something in it trembled. And this house wasn't always quiet. Lila's eyes widened. Was it happy then? Victoria looked down at her plate. Once. Jack felt the air shift. There was pain there, quiet, buried deep. Lila, sensing it in her innocent way, nodded solemnly. It could be happy again. Maybe it just needs fixing like Daddy's workshop. Victoria looked at her, truly, looked as if the child had said something impossible, yet true, and for the briefest moment a flicker passed across her face, a smile fragile and unexpected. Jack saw it, and, for reasons he couldn't name it, felt like light breaking through dust. When dinner ended, Victoria excused herself, but before she left, she paused by the door. "Your daughter has a gift," she said softly. "She sees things people forget to look for." Jack nodded. "She's her mother's child." Victoria didn't answer, but her eyes lingered a moment longer than they should have before she turned away. As her footsteps faded into the long corridor, Lila yawned and leaned against Jack's arm. She smiled, Daddy. He brushed her hair back and smiled faintly. "Yeah, she did." Lila's voice was sleepy but sure. "I think she's going to smile more." Jack looked toward the hallway where Victoria had disappeared, her shadow swallowed by the dim light. He wasn't so sure, but something inside him hoped the child was right, because somehow in that quiet house filled with ghosts and regret, one small voice had found the first crack in its walls. The days began to settle into a rhythm, quiet, deliberate, and strangely comforting. Jack worked in the old workshop from morning until the last light of evening. The walls creaked with age, but his hands moved with the steadiness of someone who found peace in purpose. Metal against metal. The hiss of the torch, the rhythmic clang of his hammer, each sound was a kind of heartbeat in that sleeping house. Sometimes through the cracked workshop window he caught a glimpse of Victoria Hale standing on the balcony above, watching him. She never called out, never interrupted, just observed in silence as though trying to remember what it felt like to create something rather than control it. Lila spent her afternoons exploring the gardens with a sketchbook she had found in one of the old rooms. She'd come back with dirt on her hands and wonder in her eyes, describing every broken statue, every hidden corner as if they were treasures. "Miss Hale doesn't go outside much," Lila said one evening while Jack cleaned his tools. "She just watches from the window. Do you think she's scared of the world?" Jack smiled faintly. "Maybe she's just forgotten what it sounds like." "What sounds like life," he said quietly. It was a Tuesday when the first storm rolled in. Dark clouds gathered above the estate wind, pressing against the windows with low moans. Jack stayed late in the workshop, finishing a repair on the generator. The smell of oil mixed with the coming rain. He heard footsteps behind him, soft but certain. "You shouldn't be out here in the storm," he said without turning. "I might say the same to you," came Victoria's voice. He looked up. She stood by the doorway, dressed in a dark coat, her hair tied back. She looked less like the untouchable woman from the magazines and more like someone who'd forgotten how to rest. "I wanted to see your progress," she said. "The estate hasn't sounded this alive in years." Jack wiped his hands with a rag. Machines don't mind being ignored. People do. Her expression flickered. "Is that what you think I am, someone who ignores?" Jack shrugged. "I think you've built too many walls around yourself. Hard to hear anything through them." Her gaze held his sharp but wounded. "Walls keep people safe." "Or trapped," he said quietly. For a long moment, neither spoke. Only the sound of thunder filled the space between them. Then Victoria stepped closer, looking around the workshop, the shelves of tools, the organized chaos, the faint warmth in the air. "This was your life, wasn't it?" she asked softly. "It still is," Jack said. She nodded slowly. "Once I had something like that, before everything turned cold." He studied her face. "Before what?" But she didn't answer. She just turned toward the rain outside. "Good night, Mr. Carver." When she was gone, Jack stood there a long while listening to the echo of her heels fading into the hall. Later that night, the storm grew stronger. The thunder rolled endlessly and rain lashed against the windows like a relentless tide. Lila couldn't sleep. She crept into Jack's room, clutching her bear. "Daddy, can I stay here?" He lifted the blanket without a word. She curled against him, her small body trembling with every crack of thunder. From down the hall came a sound, not the storm, but something else. Soft notes, faint but steady. A piano. Jack frowned. He hadn't heard music in that house since they'd arrived. He glanced at Lila, but her eyes were wide and curious. "Someone's playing," she whispered. He sat up. The melody drifted through the corridors slow, haunting, full of ache. "Stay here," he said, but she shook her head. "Please, Daddy. I want to listen." So they walked together, following the sound. It led them to a dim room at the far end of the hall, a grand parlor where dust covered the furniture and time hung heavy in the air. In the center stood an old piano, and at it Victoria Hale. Her back was to them, her fingers moving over the keys with deliberate grace. The melody filled the space, wrapping around them like a memory too fragile to touch. Jack stood silently watching. The storm outside flashed against the windows, lighting her face in brief, aching glimpses. She didn't notice them. Leela whispered, "She's sad." Victoria's hands hesitated for a fraction of a second at the sound of the child's voice. Then she stopped playing. The silence that followed was almost louder than the music. Jack cleared his throat. Didn't mean to interrupt. Victoria turned slowly. Her expression was unreadable. "It's all right. The house used to sound like this every night. My husband wrote that piece." Her gaze fell to the piano keys. He said it reminded him of forgiveness. Lila tilted her head. "It's beautiful, but it sounds like someone crying." Something flickered in Victoria's eyes, a shimmer of pain or perhaps memory. Maybe that's what it really is. Jack stepped closer. "You play well." She gave a small, humorless smile. "Once I played for joy. Now I play to remember." The thunder rolled again, and Lila climbed onto the bench beside her, pressing a random key. The note rang out bright and clumsy, but it made Victoria's lips soften into the smallest of smiles. "May I learn it?" Lila asked eagerly. Victoria hesitated. "It's not an easy song." "That's okay," the girl said. "Daddy says everything hard is worth fixing." Victoria looked at Jack, their eyes meeting across the piano. For a heartbeat, something unspoken passed between them. Recognition, understanding, maybe even grace. "I suppose he's right," Victoria whispered. "We can try." That night, when Jack put Lila to bed, she asked quietly, "Daddy, do you think Miss Hale misses her husband?" He brushed her hair back. "I think she misses the parts of herself that lived when he did." Lila frowned. Can people fix that? Jack thought for a long time. Maybe not all the way, but sometimes someone comes along and helps you remember what light feels like. She smiled sleepily. "Then maybe we can help her." He kissed her forehead. "Maybe we already are." Later, when the house was dark, Victoria sat alone at the piano again. Her fingers hovered above the keys but didn't play. Instead, she whispered into the quiet as if the walls might answer. "He said everything could be rebuilt," she murmured. "He never told me what to do when the person breaks instead of the house." Outside, the rain slowed to a soft drizzle. The last notes of her song lingered in the air, fading into silence. Upstairs, Jack lay awake listening. The melody replayed in his mind, each note echoing through the empty spaces of his heart. He closed his eyes, and for the first time since the fire, he didn't dream of ashes. He dreamed of a song, half sorrow, half hope, and of a woman who played like she was trying to remember how to live. The storm came without warning. By late afternoon, the wind had grown restless, rattling the old windows of the Hale estate. The sky darkened to the color of bruised steel. Jack stood at the edge of the workshop, staring up at the clouds rolling over the hills. He had fixed the roof that morning, but even solid metal felt fragile against what was coming. Inside the main house, the air shifted. Lila sat by the window sketching the garden, her pencil moving in soft, confident strokes. Victoria crossed the room with her usual calm grace, though the faint tension in her shoulders betrayed unease. The weather changes fast out here, Jack had warned her earlier. Now, as the first drops hit the glass, Victoria looked out across the grounds. "It'll pass," she murmured, though the wind seemed to disagree. Minutes later, rain began to fall in sheets, the kind that drowned every other sound. Thunder cracked like splitting wood. The estate, with all its age and grandeur, trembled. By dusk, the storm had become a living thing. Lightning slashed the sky, turning the gardens white for a heartbeat before swallowing them again in darkness. Jack rushed through the corridor, checking the windows and doors, making sure everything was secure. "Where's Lila?" he called to Marjorie, the housekeeper. She was in the greenhouse earlier, Marjorie shouted over the wind. The old one near the orchard. Jack froze. The greenhouse. The structure had been unstable for years. He was already running before she finished speaking. Outside, the rain hit like cold needles. Jack pushed through it, boots sinking into mud wind, roaring in his ears. He could barely see through the sheets of water, but the faint flicker of light Lila's lantern pulled him forward. "Lila!" he shouted. His voice was swallowed by the storm. He reached the greenhouse and yanked open the heavy door. Inside, the air was thick with damp earth and fear. Lila crouched behind a table, clutching her sketchbook to her chest, her small lantern flickering wildly. "Daddy!" she cried. Jack rushed to her, kneeling, pulling her into his arms. "You can't be here, sweetheart. The glass could shatter. I wanted to bring the flowers inside," she sobbed. They were going to drown. His heart ached even as fear gripped him. "We have to go right now." A sharp crack split the air, a branch crashing against the roof. One of the old glass panes gave way, scattering shards across the floor. Jack shielded Lila, his arms wrapping around her. Then, through the chaos, another voice called out, clear, sharp, and close. "Jack, Victoria." He turned, and there she was standing at the doorway, rain soaking her hair, eyes blazing with panic. She crossed the distance in seconds, grabbing a metal beam to steady herself. "Give her to me," she shouted. Jack passed Lila into her arms, then turned to brace the collapsing frame. "Go. Not without you." The next moment came like a flash, literally. Lightning struck a nearby tree, the sound deafening. The shockwave shattered the remaining pane's glass, raining down around them like crystal rain. Jack lunged, pulling Victoria and Lila to the floor, shielding them both as the structure gave one last groan and fell silent. When the thunder faded, only the sound of their breathing remained. They stumbled out into the night, soaked to the bone, covered in dirt and shards of glass. The rain had softened, though the wind still whispered like an echo of what had been. Victoria's hand bled from a cut crimson against the pale of her skin. Jack took her wrist gently. "You're hurt." "It's nothing," she said, her voice unsteady. He tore a strip from his sleeve and wrapped it around her hand, his fingers trembling slightly. Their eyes met, and for the first time there was no distance, no armor, just raw, human relief. Lila, shivering between them, looked up and said in a small, tired voice, "You both look like superheroes." Victoria blinked, and then to Jack's astonishment, she laughed. It was a soft, broken sound, at first like something unused for too long, but it grew light and real. Jack found himself smiling back despite everything. The storm had left its scars, but in its wake something else had taken root, a kind of fragile warmth. Back inside, Marjorie fussed over them with towels and tea. Lila sat by the fire, wrapped in a blanket, her eyelids heavy with exhaustion. Victoria sat across from her, silent, her gaze fixed on the flames. Jack handed her a cup. "You should rest. That hand needs tending." She accepted it, but didn't drink. "I haven't run through a storm since I was a child," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "You did good. Brave, even." Her eyes flicked up, searching his. "I wasn't brave. I was terrified. That's what makes it count," he said. She looked away, but her expression softened. "You risked your life for her." He shook his head. "She's all I have. There's no risk too great for that." Victoria nodded slowly, her fingers tracing the edge of the teacup. "I remember feeling that way once." Jack hesitated. "About your husband." A shadow crossed her face. "Yes, about him, and the child we lost." The words hung in the air, fragile and devastating. Jack's breath caught, but he said nothing. The fire crackled softly between them, filling the silence with its slow, steady rhythm. Victoria looked down at her bandaged hand. "I built these walls to keep out the pain." But tonight, she exhaled her voice barely above a whisper. Tonight, it felt good to care again. Jack's throat tightened. Then, maybe the storm did what it was meant to. She met his gaze, and in that quiet moment, something passed between them, an unspoken understanding that neither could quite name. Lila stirred half asleep, murmuring, "Daddy." She smiled again. Jack smiled too. "I saw." Victoria's lips curved shyly this time. "You too should get some sleep." "So should you," Jack replied. She nodded, but didn't move her eyes, drifting back to the fire. As the night settled around them, the house seemed different, less haunted, less hollow. For the first time, laughter had echoed through its halls. Outside, the rain finally stopped. The air smelled clean, renewed. And though the storm had passed, its mark remained not as destruction, but as proof that even in the darkest tempests, something tender could still survive. The storm had passed, but it left behind a stillness that felt almost sacred. The air smelled of wet earth and pine. The next morning, soft sunlight filtered through the clouds, catching on puddles that glimmered like fragments of silver. Jack walked through the estate grounds with his hands in his pockets, boots sinking slightly into the softened soil. The greenhouse lay in ruins behind him, its shattered glass now glinting harmlessly in the sun. He would fix it, of course. That's what he did. He fixed things. But for now, he simply breathed, feeling the world settle again. He found Lila near the overgrown garden behind the east wall. She was crouched by a patch of wild grass, her fingers digging in the dirt. "What are you doing?" "Kiddo." She looked up, her cheeks smudged with mud, but her smile bright. "Planting flowers." Miss Hale said, "I could have this corner." He raised a brow. Did she now? Lila nodded eagerly. She said it used to be her favorite place, but nobody's taken care of it since her husband. Jack's heart softened. Then I guess it's about time someone brought it back to life. He helped her clear the dead roots and broken branches, his hands steady and sure. The soil was dark, fertile, the kind that remembered things. A few minutes later, Victoria appeared at the garden gate. She wore a simple linen dress and no shoes, her hair tied loosely behind her. For the first time since he'd met her, she looked less like a woman built from ice, and more like someone simply trying to thaw. "You're both early risers," she said, her tone light. "Habit," Jack replied, glancing up. "Work doesn't do itself." She smiled faintly. "Nor does healing, I suppose." Lila waved her over. "Ms. Hale, look, we found tiny buds under all the weeds." Victoria knelt beside her, touching the fragile sprout with care. "These are irises," she said softly. "My husband loved them. He said they were the color of forgiveness." Her voice trembled on that last word. Jack looked at her. Really looked. There was a story behind that softness, something buried deep beneath years of silence. Lila, blissfully unaware of the weight in the air, began to hum while patting the soil around the roots. The small melody, bright and imperfect, seemed to reach a place in Victoria that no one had touched in years. "You have a good daughter," she said quietly. "She has a good heart," Jack replied. "Better than mine ever was." Victoria shook her head. "You risked your life for her. That's a heart anyone would be proud of." He gave a small, rueful smile. "I've made my share of mistakes. Maybe too many." Her eyes met his. Then we're two of a kind. They worked together for hours, clearing weeds and planting new bulbs. The rhythm of it, hands and soil breath in sync, felt almost like a conversation in another language. Words weren't needed. At one point, Victoria paused, brushing dirt from her fingers. "You once told me you used to build things that mattered." "What did you mean by that?" Jack leaned back on his heels. "I worked on a project meant to bring clean energy to small towns. It got shut down before we could finish. politics, greed, take your pick. Her face tightened slightly. Was it a Hale Industries project? He hesitated. It was. The silence that followed was heavy but not hostile. Victoria's eyes flickered with something like guilt. I didn't know, she said. Not then. I was younger, too busy protecting the family name to notice what that name was doing to people. Jack didn't answer right away. Instead, he planted another flower, pressing the soil gently. Maybe some things can't be undone, but they can be rebuilt differently. She nodded slowly as if she were memorizing his words. By noon, Lila had declared the garden officially alive again. She stood proudly between them, dirt on her knees and sunlight in her hair. Victoria smiled, a real, unguarded smile. You've done more for this place in one morning than I have in 10 years. That's because you forgot to play in the dirt, Lila said wisely. Victoria laughed softly, and the sound startled even her. I suppose I did. Jack leaned against the fence, watching them. There was something profoundly human about the moment, fragile, ordinary, and beautiful in its simplicity. When Lila ran off to fetch her sketchbook, Victoria stayed behind. The laughter faded into a quiet neither of them rushed to fill. She traced a leaf between her fingers and said, My husband died in a factory explosion 10 years ago. One of ours. Hale Biochem. Jack stiffened but stayed silent. He was overseeing a safety test. Something failed. Her voice was calm, almost detached, but her hands trembled. I was told it was an accident, but deep down I knew it was negligence. Our negligence. Jack felt the ground shift beneath him. I'm sorry, he said quietly. She nodded. I tried to bury it under work, under pride. But this house, it keeps every echo, every regret. He looked at her, his expression softening. You're not the only one haunted by a past you didn't choose. For a moment, their eyes held. The air between them carried the weight of shared understanding. Two people bound not by love yet but by the ache of survival. That evening, the three of them sat in the garden under fading light. Lila sketched while Jack and Victoria watched her. The air was cool and the scent of rain still lingered. Lila held up her drawing, a rough but charming image of the three of them among the flowers. Look, we're all smiling. Victoria tilted her head, touched. That's quite the miracle. Leela giggled. Maybe it's the flowers. They make people remember happy things. Jack smiled at his daughter's simple wisdom. You might be right. As twilight deepened, Victoria stood. Thank you for today, for reminding me that some things can grow again, even in old soil. Jack nodded. It's good soil, he said. It just needed someone to care. She looked at him, then something unspoken flickering in her gaze. And what about you, Mr. Carver? What do you need? He hesitated. I don't know yet, but I think I'm starting to remember. Victoria gave a small, wistful smile. Then we'll both keep trying. As she walked back toward the mansion, the wind stirred softly through the garden. The newly planted irises swayed gently in the breeze as if nodding in quiet approval. Jack stood there for a long while, watching her silhouette fade into the twilight, feeling something he hadn't felt in years, a cautious kind of hope. And when Lila slipped her small hand into his, he realized the house was no longer silent. It was breathing again. Autumn crept into Somerset quietly, the way regrets often do, slowly and all at once. The leaves around the Hale estate turned to copper and gold, whispering against the wind. The air had changed. It smelled of wood smoke, old books, and something Jack couldn't quite name. Weeks had passed since the garden had come alive again. The irises bloomed pale purple and stubborn, just like the people who had planted them. Lila spent her days sketching them while Jack repaired the west wing and Victoria. She seemed different now, softer, though she didn't know how to show it yet. Sometimes Jack caught her watching Lila with an expression that looked almost maternal. Sometimes when he caught her watching him, she didn't look away. But healing Jack had learned rarely comes without a sting. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday. He was in the library searching for architectural plans for the estate's roof. The room smelled faintly of leather and dust, its high shelves reaching toward the ceiling like silent witnesses. As he reached for a folder tucked behind a row of old ledgers, a stack of papers tumbled down. Among them, an envelope, thick and sealed, marked with a faded stamp, Hale Biochem, Internal Report. Jack froze. He recognized that name. Too well. Hands suddenly unsteady, he opened the envelope. Inside were reports, safety audits, maintenance logs, all dated from over a decade ago. He flipped through the pages until one line caught his eye. Incident at Site B17. Chemical storage malfunction due to unapproved modifications. Fatality confirmed Claire Carver, external contractor. The words blurred. His breath caught. Claire Carver, his wife. For a moment he couldn't move. The air thickened, pressing down on him. His pulse roared in his ears. He read the line again and again as if repetition might change the truth. It didn't. The report was signed by Victoria Hale. By the time he reached the courtyard, the world had narrowed to sound the crunch of his boots, the wind slicing through the trees, the sharp beat of his heart. Victoria was standing near the garden, trimming dead branches. She turned at the sound of his footsteps. Jack. He threw the folder to the ground. Pages scattered like broken glass between them. Did you know? His voice cracked with disbelief. Did you know about this? Victoria stared down at the papers. The color drained from her face. Jack, I don't, he snapped. Don't say you didn't. Your name's right there. You signed it. I signed hundreds of reports, she said, her voice trembling. I didn't. You didn't. His words were sharp-cutting. Didn't bother to read. Didn't care who your company killed as long as the profits were safe. Victoria flinched as if struck. You think I wouldn't have stopped it if I'd known Jack's anger boiled over. My wife died because of Hale Biochem. Because of you. Lila, who had been sketching by the fountain, froze. Daddy Jack turned his chest, heaving. Go inside, Lila. Her voice wavered. What's happening now? She hesitated, then ran tears already forming. When she was gone, Victoria whispered, I swear to you, Jack, I didn't know she was your wife. I didn't even. But you knew someone died, he interrupted bitterly. You knew, and you buried it. You built walls to keep it quiet, didn't you? Her eyes filled with tears. I was told it was an accident. I believed it. God help me, I wanted to believe it. Jack shook his head. Belief doesn't erase blood. He turned away, but she stepped forward, desperate. Jack, please, let me explain. There's nothing left to explain. His voice was cold now, the edge of fury fading into something worse, grief. You and your company destroyed everything I loved, and I let you into my home. I let you near my daughter. Don't say that, she whispered. Don't take her away from me. He stared at her. She was never yours to lose. That night, the sky opened again as if the heavens themselves couldn't bear the silence. Rain poured hard against the windows. Jack packed what little they had. Lila stood by the door, her eyes red and confused. Why are we leaving? He didn't answer right away. How could he tell her that the woman she'd begun to love had a hand, however distant, in their deepest wound? Sometimes, he said finally, we find light in the wrong places. And if we stay too long, it burns. Lila hugged her bear tighter. But she's not bad, Daddy. She's sad, like us. He swallowed hard, his chest aching. Some things can't be fixed, Lila. As they stepped outside, the rain swallowed their footsteps. The car engine rumbled to life. Inside, Jack's hands trembled on the steering wheel. He looked up once toward the mansion. A single figure stood at the balcony, Victoria soaked and motionless, her hand pressed against the railing as if to hold herself upright. Her voice carried faintly through the storm, raw and breaking. Jack, I didn't know she was your wife. But the rain drowned her words. He drove away the tires splashing through puddles, the estate vanishing behind them into the dark. Inside the empty house, Victoria collapsed against the doorframe, the papers still scattered across the courtyard like confessions. Marjorie found her there, trembling. "Miss Hale, what happened?" Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. "The past happened." She picked up one of the soaked pages, the line that named Claire Carver, and stared at it until the ink bled away beneath the rain. Her hand covered her mouth as the sob finally escaped. Miles away in the small motel where Jack and Lila stopped for the night, the silence between them was unbearable. Leela lay on the bed, clutching her bear. "Daddy," she whispered. "I don't think she meant to hurt us." Jack sat in the chair by the window, staring out at the storm. His voice was low, heavy. "Intentions don't change what's done. But maybe she's sorry." He turned to her, and for the first time that night his eyes softened. Maybe he said quietly, "But sorry doesn't bring your mother back." Lila's tears fell silently. "Do you hate her now?" Jack looked away. The rain blurred the glass until the outside world disappeared. "I don't know what I feel," he admitted. "Maybe that's the worst part." She nodded, small and solemn, as if she understood more than he wanted her to. When she finally fell asleep, Jack closed his eyes, hearing Victoria's voice echo faintly in his mind. "I didn't know." He wanted to believe her. God, he wanted to. But trust once burned leaves only ashes. The desert was a quieter kind of loneliness. In New Mexico, mornings began with the soft scrape of wind along stucco walls and the distant call of a train. Coffee smelled stronger here, sharper, as if it wanted to keep a man awake to what he'd lost. Jack fixed things in a one-room shop off the highway, swamp coolers, farm pumps, old radios that crackled with ghosts. He liked the hum of small motors, the honest tick of gears finding their rhythm again. It was work that didn't lie. He could hand something back and say, "It runs," and for a few seconds his chest would loosen. Lila walked to school with a backpack that squeaked on one strap. She always waved twice at the corner, once for the world, once for whoever was missing it. In the afternoons, she sat on the porch with paper and charcoal, drawing the same house again and again, 2 windows, one open, one closed. "Why always that house?" Jack asked one evening, lowering himself onto the step beside her. The wood creaked in a weary, forgiving way. She shaded the open window with small, careful strokes. "Because I keep thinking the closed one will open if I draw it right." Jack looked at the sketch. The open window spilled light in soft lines. The other kept its darkness like a promise. He wanted to say that some windows never opened. He wanted not to say it. "You're getting good with shadows," he said instead. "It's easier to draw the dark parts," she murmured. He didn't answer. The desert wind moved across the dry grass, a sound like pages turning. Time arranged itself into neat, forgettable weeks. Jack kept a calendar by the register, crossing off days with a dull pencil. He told himself he liked the order. He told himself routine was a kindness. At night, when sleep wouldn't come, he thought of the estate's long hallways and the way footsteps echoed there. He heard the memory of a piano, the ache in each note, the way a voice he didn't want to miss had said forgiveness like it might be something you could hold. He tried not to hear it. He failed. In the evenings, Lila drew and hummed under her breath. Sometimes she stopped and stared out past the fence as if listening to a faraway answer. "Do you think she's okay?" she asked once, not looking at him. Jack knew who she meant. He opened his mouth, closed it again. "I don't know." "I think about her voice," Lila said. It sounded tired, like the kind of tired that doesn't sleep. He rubbed his thumb against a callus in his palm. People can carry tired a long time. Should they? He didn't have a good answer for that either. Autumn came hard to the desert, not with color but with a cleaner edge to the air. The nights snapped. The attic breathed a little colder. The television in the living room worked when it wanted to, antenna turned, just so a roll of tape keeping the back panel from popping loose. One Friday, the evening news stuttered into focus mid-sentence, all bright studio voices and flat concern. Lila poured cereal as if it were an event, clink of spoon-soft crunch. Jack sank into the thrift store couch joints, clicking like old hinges. A headline scrolled across the bottom of the screen, Hale Industries Scandal Former CEO Under Investigation. Jack reached for the remote by reflex. He didn't want this house in his house. His thumb hovered over the power button. Lila looked up. Not a pleading look, not even a question. Just a quiet, steady request from the small person who had learned to read the weather inside him. He didn't press the button. The anchor's voice flattened into serious. Victoria Hale, once the face of Hale Industries, faces allegations of embezzlement tied to offshore accounts. Sources claim she resigned before the board could take action. Her current whereabouts are unknown. The screen filled with photographs Victoria at a charity gala. Victoria with a ribbon and a shovel. Victoria beside men who smiled with clean teeth. The pictures were all bright rooms and clapping hands. Jack listened for the sound rooms make when they empty. He heard it anyway. Embezzlement, Lila whispered. That's stealing, right? He swallowed. That's what they're saying. But she... Lila stopped the word catching. She planted flowers with us. Jack felt something old and mean rise in him. People can plant flowers and still burn fields. He didn't say it. He watched the crawl of names and numbers he couldn't do anything about. A talking head replaced the anchor and said words like fiduciary and malfeasance. Another segment ran a list of acquisitions and closures. Small companies swallowed towns, losing lights one by one. Jack recognized too many of the names. The ache in his jaw crept toward anger, then past it into that quieter place where worn-out things go. Lila drew her knees up on the couch. "Do you think she really did it? I think the world's messy," Jack said. "And rich people don't always get messy on themselves." "That's not an answer." He set the remote down and pressed his fingers into the old fabric cushion until it squeaked. "I don't know," he said. It was the most honest sentence he had. The broadcast shifted to footage outside a courthouse microphone's umbrellas, a wall of weatherproof smiles. Someone said the board had been blindsided. Someone else said these things never happen without boardrooms knowing first. The studio lights made certainty easy. Jack felt the urge to shut it off to close the door on this voice of another life. He reached again for the remote. Lila's hand touched his sleeve. "Can we just listen a little longer?" He let his hand fall away. After the news, the quiet returned with a weight. The refrigerator kicked on in the kitchen and made itself brave. A neighbor's dog barked at nothing. Air moved through the vent with a tired sigh. Lila went to the table and pulled her drawing closer. 2 windows. The open one glowed. The closed one was a mouth that wouldn't speak. "She's not hiding," Lila said more to the paper than to him. "I don't think so." "What do you think she's doing? Trying to fix something?" She shaded the darkness deeper, then softened one edge with her thumb. "When you try to fix something big, people who don't want it fixed get loud." Jack looked at his daughter, those steady eyes, that stubborn mercy. "Claire, you would have recognized this," he thought. "You would have told me not to be a coward about it." He stood and wandered to the window. The desert evening was a low hush, tires on the highway, a far radio, the dry churr of something small and alive. He put his palm against the glass. It was cool. He remembered another pane of glass rain streaking at a woman at a piano, a note that didn't resolve. Behind him, paper rasped as Lila signed her name in the corner of the drawing. She held it up for him to see. The light from the lamp made the open window seem to breathe. A small figure stood inside it, just a hint of a woman, only lines, but he knew her anyway. The closed window sat beside it like a kept secret. He felt the faintest movement in his chest, as if a screw he'd turned too tight had given the smallest mercy. "You think the dark one will open?" he asked. "I think it's waiting," Lila said. "Sometimes windows want to be asked." Jack looked at the drawing a long time. "Maybe you should put it on the wall." She smiled, like that was the right answer. She taped it gently above the TV, 2 pieces of yellowing tape at the corners, careful not to wrinkle the paper. The set reflected the image back at them where the screen had gone black, 2 windows side by side. One with light, one without. Jack stood there and let silence be a kind of prayer. He almost reached for the remote again, almost gave himself the relief of not knowing. He didn't. He sat down, eyes on the drawing, and thought of a gate he had once walked through and a door he had once closed. He thought of a woman with a bandaged hand who had laughed like remembering how. In the picture on the wall, the bright window waited. In the dark one, something changed. Maybe just his eyes, maybe more. Jack exhaled and felt the smallest hinge move. He didn't turn on the TV. He looked at the 2 windows, and in the open one the light held. The desert morning began like any other quiet gold and empty. But for Jack, Carver, something had shifted. He couldn't explain it. Maybe it was the way Lila's drawing looked in the pale sunlight, the open window glowing faintly as if it carried its own pulse. Maybe it was the silence that followed the news, a silence that didn't feel like peace, but like a door waiting to be opened. Whatever it was, he woke with a restlessness he couldn't shake. By noon, he'd fixed 2 air conditioners and a broken toaster. But his thoughts kept wandering, circling the same question he'd been avoiding. What if Lila was right? What if Victoria wasn't hiding? What if she was fighting? He closed the shop early. The bell above the door jingled its lonely note as he locked up. That evening after dinner he sat at the small kitchen table while Lila drew quietly beside him. The radio hummed low in the background, its voice brittle and distant. Then a news update cut in short, factual, the kind of tone meant for people who didn't know they were about to care. In a surprising development, sources confirmed that Victoria Hale, former CEO of Hale Industries, has liquidated all personal assets. Documents show the funds were redirected to the Hale Relief Trust, a foundation providing restitution for victims of the biochem accident. Jack froze. Lila stopped drawing. "Daddy, did they just say?" He nodded, slowly, unable to speak. The announcer continued. Authorities investigating the embezzlement charges now suspect internal fraud by Hale's board of directors. Ms. Hale herself remains missing, though new information suggests she left voluntarily, possibly to avoid further harm to those involved in her company's downfall. The radio clicked off. Jack hadn't touched it. He'd simply pulled the plug from the wall. He sat there staring at the empty socket. His hands were shaking. Victoria Hale selling everything she had, to help the families her company had hurt, to help people like him. For the first time in years, he opened his laptop again. The screen took its time, waking up humming with static and old dust. His inbox was a graveyard of unread messages, old invoices, things that no longer mattered. But when he typed her name into the search bar, 100 results appeared: articles, interviews, corporate statements. He scrolled through them, eyes scanning headlines. Most painted her as a villain, others as a fallen queen. None seemed to understand her. Then one article caught his eye. Hale Industries whistleblower claims CEO was targeted by board. He clicked it. The piece was brief: anonymous sources, legal language, all half-truths. But one line made his pulse quicken. The CEO's internal documents revealed her intent to dismantle the biochem division after the explosion, an action halted by the board before her resignation. Jack leaned back, breath caught somewhere between disbelief and guilt. She had tried to fix it, to end it. He thought of her standing in the rain, shouting through the storm. "I didn't know." He thought of her hands in the soil beside Lila, of the way her voice had softened when she said forgiveness. The walls of his chest tightened. For the first time he saw her not as the architect of his loss, but as another soul trapped beneath the same wreckage. Lila's voice broke through his thoughts. So, she was helping them, the people who got hurt. Jack nodded slowly. Looks like she was trying to. Then why is she gone? He exhaled. Because sometimes the truth costs too much to live with. Lila tilted her head. Then maybe someone needs to help her carry it. He looked at his daughter, her eyes clear and unafraid. and he knew he couldn't stay here anymore. The next morning, Jack woke before sunrise. He made coffee, packed a small bag, and left a note on the kitchen counter for the neighbor to check on the shop. Lila sat at the table, her backpack ready, swinging her legs. "Where are we going?" she asked, though. Her smile said she already knew. "East," Jack said. "We'll start there." Back to her. He hesitated, to find out if there's anything left to save. They drove for hours, the road stretching endlessly before them. The desert faded into forest, the forest into coast. Each mile peeled away something heavy from Jack's chest, though it hurt to let it go. At a rest stop, he checked the laptop again. No new updates, just the same recycled headlines. Then, buried in a forum thread, he found a comment unsigned, easily missed Victoria Hale, cited teaching at a small orphanage near the coast. No security, no staff, just her and the kids. She calls it Light Roots. He stared at the words, the name, pulling at something deep inside him. Light Roots. Lila leaned over his shoulder. "That sounds like her," she said softly. "Roots and light. She likes both." Jack smiled faintly. "Yeah, she does." He closed the laptop and started the engine again. Hours later, as night approached, they reached the edge of the coast. Waves crashed faintly in the distance, a rhythm older than their pain. The air smelled of salt and pine. Lila fell asleep in the passenger seat, her head resting against the window. Jack glanced at her and whispered, "We're almost there." The road narrowed into a dirt path lined with wildflowers and the remnants of an old fence. Ahead, a small building stood against the horizon, a simple structure with hand-painted signs and laughter drifting faintly from within. Children's laughter. He parked the truck and sat there staring. For the first time in years, his hands didn't shake. He could see her through the open doorway, Victoria Hale hair tied back, kneeling beside a group of children as they fixed a broken wind-up toy. Her voice was calm, her smile small but real. Jack felt something in his chest crack, not from pain this time, but from release. Lila stirred beside him, blinking awake. "Is that her?" "Yeah," Jack whispered. "That's her." She watched for a moment, then said softly, "She looks happy." Jack nodded. She earned it. He turned off the engine. The silence that followed was the kind that holds peace instead of loss. Then without another word he opened the door. The sound of his boots on gravel felt like a heartbeat finding its rhythm again. He took a deep breath, the wind brushing his face carrying the faint scent of the ocean and something sweeter hope. Behind him, Lila smiled, clutching her drawing of the two windows close to her chest. The closed one she knew was about to open. The sea was the first sound Jack heard when he stepped out of the truck, soft, endless, and patient. It was a sound that didn't demand to be heard. It simply existed like forgiveness waiting for someone to notice it. He stood still for a long moment, taking it in the salt in the air, the call of distant gulls, the laughter of children carried faintly by the wind. After years of machines and storms and silence, the ocean's calm felt almost unreal. Lila tugged at his sleeve. "Is it really her daddy?" He followed her gaze toward the small building at the edge of the cliffs. Faded paint, handmade wind chimes, a garden where flowers grew wild but free. And there she was, Victoria Hale, kneeling beside a broken bicycle showing a little boy how to fix its chain. "Yes," Jack said quietly. "It's her." Lila smiled, a small knowing thing. "I told you she was trying to fix something." Jack almost smiled back. "You were right." They waited until the children drifted off toward the dormitory, their laughter fading into dusk. Victoria stood alone in the yard, brushing dust from her hands, the ocean light turning her hair silver. Jack walked toward her. Gravel crunched under his boots, steady, deliberate. She didn't notice him at first, not until he was close enough for the wind to carry his voice. "Looks like you're still fixing things," he said. She turned. The shock on her face froze her in place. "Jack." Her voice trembled on his name as if saying it might undo her. "How did you find you?" He nodded toward the sign painted above the doorway, Lightroot's Foundation. You left a trail. And a name. Victoria lowered her eyes, a sad smile forming. I didn't think anyone would follow it. I almost didn't. For a long moment they just stood there, two people shaped by the same fire, separated by choices that had burned them both. Finally, she spoke. You shouldn't have come. I don't deserve, don't he interrupted softly. Don't decide what I came here to give. She looked at him, then really looked. His hair had grayed. His hands were rough, but his eyes were still steady, the same eyes that had once held rage and grief, now carrying something quieter. Why Jack? She asked. After everything, he let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh. Because Lila wouldn't let me forget who you really were. Her expression broke fragile and human. Your daughter. She saw me better than I saw myself. She tends to do that, he said. They stood in silence again, the ocean murmuring between them. When she finally spoke, her words came slow and deliberate. I lost everything. The company, the estate, the name. But it's strange, once all the noise was gone, I started hearing what mattered. What did you hear? The sound of children laughing, she said softly, and the sound of my own guilt turning into something else. Something lighter. Jack's throat tightened. You built this place for them. I sold what was left. Every cent went into this foundation. These kids, they're the ones we failed Jack. Orphans from the biochem disaster. The ones whose names no one remembered. I thought maybe if I could give them a future, I'd finally stop being afraid to live in my own past. He watched her, the wind catching strands of her hair, her eyes rimmed with fatigue but shining with something real. You didn't have to disappear, he said quietly. You could have told me. She shook her head. Would you have listened? Jack didn't answer, because they both knew he wouldn't have. Not then. Lila appeared at the doorway, her backpack slung over her shoulder, her smile soft and bright. Hi, Ms. Hale. Victoria's eyes widened, tears welling instantly. Lila. The girl ran forward and wrapped her arms around her waist. You found the light, Lila said simply. Victoria laughed through tears, holding her tightly. Maybe I just followed yours. Jack stood nearby, watching them, his hands buried in his pockets. For the first time in years, the sight of someone else's joy didn't hurt. It healed. Later, when the sun dipped below the horizon, the three of them sat by a fire pit overlooking the sea. The flames danced in the wind, painting their faces in gold and amber. Victoria turned to Jack, her voice quiet but steady. You were right, you know, about rebuilding. He smiled faintly. Took me long enough to realize what that really meant. What does it mean to you now? He thought for a moment. That not everything can be fixed with metal and tools. Some things need patience. And forgiveness. She nodded, eyes glistening. Forgiveness, she repeated. It's the hardest kind of repair. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out something small, a rusted wrench worn and dented from years of use. This was from the workshop, he said. The one that burned down. She looked at it, puzzled. Why bring it here? He turned the wrench over in his hands, the fire reflecting off the metal. Because it's the only thing I had left that reminds me of both the fire that destroyed me and the work that saved me. He held it out to her. And because I want it to mean something else now. Her breath caught. Jack. He smiled gently. I'm not good with words, but I figured this was the closest thing I had to a promise. A promise. He nodded. That we don't have to carry the past alone anymore. Tears slipped down her cheeks. She reached for the wrench, her fingers brushing his. You have no idea what this means to me. Maybe I do, he said softly. They sat there quiet, watching the waves roll in, each one breaking, then beginning again. After a long silence, she whispered, You know, I thought redemption was about making things right, but maybe it's about letting someone stay when they have every reason to walk away. He looked at her eyes reflecting the firelight. "I didn't come here for redemption," he said. "I came because my daughter still believed in something I'd forgotten." "What's that?" He smiled. "That broken things can still shine." Victoria's hand tightened around the wrench. Her voice trembled. "Then let me try again. Not as the woman who ruined your life, just as someone who finally learned what life is for." Jack's heart swelled with something too large for words. He reached for her hand. "Then let's rebuild Victoria. Not the past, just what's left of now." She nodded, tears glimmering in her eyes. "Yes, Jack. Let's start there." The wind rose, carrying the scent of salt and smoke. The sound of the waves filled the space between them, not as noise but as rhythm, a heartbeat the world had been holding for them both. Lila's voice came from behind, soft as the tide. "You fixed it," she said. "Both of you." Jack turned toward her, smiling. "We're getting there." Victoria laughed gently through her tears, whispering, "Then maybe we're finally home." A year passed, but at the Light Roots Foundation time felt different. It didn't rush or drag, it breathed. The mornings began with the sound of hammers and laughter echoing off the sea cliffs. Children ran barefoot through the courtyard, their voices bright as birds. The scent of sawdust and salt mixed in the air. And amid it all, Jack Carver stood beside a half-built workbench, his sleeves rolled up, showing a boy how to sand a piece of wood smooth enough to reflect light. "See," Jack said, steady and patient. "When you take your time, the rough edges start to listen." The boy nodded solemnly, his small hands covered in dust. Like people, Jack smiled. Exactly like people. Across the yard, Victoria Hale was helping two girls plant saplings near the fence. She wore jeans, her hair tied back, the sun touching her face with warmth instead of judgment. The world no longer called her a CEO or a scandal, it simply called her Miss V. And for the first time in her life, that was enough. Layla sat nearby with her sketchbook, drawing the scene with her usual quiet focus. Her hair fluttered in the sea breeze, her pencil moving in gentle, confident lines. When she was done, she held it up. "It's us," she said proudly. "All of us." Jack glanced at the page. The picture showed the three of them standing beneath a wide oak tree, roots stretching deep into the earth, sunlight spilling through its leaves. At the bottom, in her neat handwriting, she'd written one word: Light Roots. Victoria looked at the drawing for a long time, her voice soft. "You know, that's exactly what I wanted this place to be." Layla grinned. Then it worked. That afternoon, the Foundation's first open workshop began. People from nearby towns gathered to watch. The sound of tools filled the air, metal tapping saws humming, children giggling as they learned how to build birdhouses and repair old bicycles. Jack moved between stations, guiding hands, steadying tools, laughing in ways he hadn't in years. He caught Victoria's eye across the yard. She was watching him with quiet admiration, her hands still on the child's shoulders she was helping. When the day ended, the children carried their creations to the shoreline, placing them on a long wooden table for display. The sun was sinking low, painting everything in gold. Victoria walked over to Jack, her hands resting lightly on her apron. "They look proud," she said, watching the children run. "They should be," Jack replied. "They built something with their own hands." She smiled, the expression easy and free. "You taught them that." He shook his head. "No, you gave them a place where they could believe it mattered." She fell quiet, looking out toward the horizon. "I used to think success was about what you leave behind. Now I think it's about who you lift up while you're still here." Jack nodded slowly. "Guess we both learned something about rebuilding." Victoria turned to him, her voice softer. "Jack, thank you for not giving up on me." "On this?" He looked at her for a long moment. "You did the same for me. Maybe that's what this is all about, fixing things together until the light finds its way back in." A gust of wind swept through the courtyard, carrying the scent of salt and lavender. The chimes near the door rang clear and bright. Victoria's eyes glistened. Sometimes I wonder what Claire would think if she saw us here." Jack smiled, the sadness in it gentle now. "I think she'd say thank you for giving her daughter a world that feels safe again." Victoria reached out, touching his hand. "You gave me that, too." He didn't pull away. The moment stretched between them easy and certain like the tide returning home. Later that evening, as twilight deepened, the foundation glowed with lanterns and laughter. The children danced barefoot on the sand. Someone strummed a guitar. Lila sat near the fire, sketching by its light. Victoria and Jack stood by the edge of the shore, the waves kissing their boots. The ocean whispered softly, pulling at their reflections. "She's grown," Victoria said quietly. Jack followed her gaze toward Lila. "Yeah, and she's strong. Stronger than either of us ever were at her age. She has both your light and her mother's grace." He chuckled softly. "And your stubbornness." Victoria laughed, a sound so warm it melted into the night. Then she grew thoughtful. "You know, when I lost everything, I thought I'd never belong anywhere again. But standing here, hearing them laugh, I finally feel like I'm home." Jack looked at her. "Home isn't a place, Victoria. It's people. It's what we build when we stop running from what broke us." She turned to him, eyes glistening in the firelight. "And if I told you I don't want to run anymore?" He smiled. "Then I'd say you finally learned how to stay." She leaned closer, resting her head lightly against his shoulder. The sound of the ocean filled the silence between them. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. When the stars came out, Lila joined them, holding a small wooden box she'd built herself. Inside lay the old rusted wrench, the one Jack had once offered Victoria as a promise. "I thought this belonged here," Lila said, handing it to her father. "Every tool that built this place should stay in it." Jack opened the box, looking down at the wrench. It was no longer just a piece of metal. It was a story, a scar, and a symbol of everything they'd survived. He closed the lid gently and smiled. "Then it stays." Victoria brushed a tear from her cheek. "It's funny," she said. "All the things we thought were broken, they just needed roots." Lila looked between them, her voice clear and steady. "And light." Jack put an arm around her shoulders. "Exactly." The three of them stood there as the waves shimmered under the moonlight, the foundation glowing softly behind them like a lighthouse built from second chances. And when the night grew quiet, Lila spoke again, her voice older, somehow filled with knowing. "I used to think light came from the sky," she said. "But now I know it comes from people who forgive, who start again, who believe that even rust can shine if you let it." Jack and Victoria exchanged a look that said everything words never could. Behind them, the laughter of children mingled with the wind echoing across the cliffs. The world didn't feel broken anymore. It felt rebuilt, stronger, softer, alive. Jack exhaled the sound like a prayer. "We did it, Claire," he whispered to the sea. "We found the light again." Victoria squeezed his hand. Lila rested her head on his arm, and together under the endless stars and the promise of new beginnings they stood at the edge of the ocean where the roots of light ran deep and love at last had found its home. Sometimes the things we lose are only waiting to return in another form, softer, wiser, and full of light. Jack, Victoria, and little Lila taught us that forgiveness isn't about erasing the past. It's about rebuilding from it, because even when everything seems broken, there's always something left that can still shine: kindness, courage, love. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever witnessed or lived a moment of second chances? A time when light returned to your life after the storm? Share your story in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from. Every story, every place, every voice adds another root to this growing tree of hope. And if you believe in stories that heal, inspire, and remind us of the good still left in the world, make sure to subscribe to this channel. Your support helps these stories reach more hearts, one listener at a time. Thank you for being here, for feeling, for remembering that we are all connected by the light we give. Until next time, keep your heart open, your hands kind, and your roots strong. This is the Roots of Light. Thank you for watching, and thank you for listening.